Good morning, everyone. The committee will come to order. I apologize, a little bit later start than I had hoped. Over the years, we have conducted a number of hearings designed to examine the vulnerabilities of our nation's electric grid system. And in this Congress, we've held a series of hearings focused on cybersecurity, electromagnetic pulse, and grid security issues at both the full and the subcommittee levels. During today's hearing, we will add to that by looking at advanced and emerging cyber technologies and processes that are being developed in our national labs and in the private sector. These are technological improvements and sometimes breakthroughs that could be used to protect the grid as well as other critical energy infrastructure from future cyber attacks. I have mentioned certainly many times in this committee, but outside of the committee as well, that around the country, sometimes we get the sense that folks believe in this immaculate conception theory of energy, that it just happens. And we all recognize, I think, that there is a lot more to this than that. But a related question is what happens? What happens when the lights don't turn on? When you flip that switch and you just expect it to happen, and then they're not there. What happens when electricity is out for an extended period of time? And we're certainly seeing that in Puerto Rico right now, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the real-world impact of an extended power outage. Just as we can harden our energy infrastructure to protect it from natural disasters, we must also look to ways to harden the grid from constantly evolving cyber intrusions as well. It seems like every day now we hear about an attempted hack or an actual breach that has taken place, and the list is long and getting longer. OPM, Ukraine's power grid, the WannaCry ransomware, Equifax, Anthem, Home Depot, Target, the list keeps growing and growing. Just last Friday, the Department of Homeland Security issued a public alert of an ongoing hacking threat to the U.S. energy systems. And in the midst of all of this, we have to continually look for ways to eliminate, diminish, or mitigate our vulnerabilities. So whether it's the application of quantum encryption, artificial intelligence, or moving control of grid infrastructure off of the public internet, the witnesses that we have today will help provide our committee with insights into how we can protect our national energy infrastructure now and into the future. Now, I mentioned quantum encryption, and I'd like to note a recent article by McClatchy about the advances that China has made on this topic. Earlier this year, China announced that a satellite and ground station 745 miles apart had communicated through quantum particles. Last month, a video conference between China and Austria, this is a distance of about 4,600 miles, was held via China's quantum satellite. They've established a 1,200-mile quantum link between Shanghai and Beijing and announced that they will build a $10 billion quantum research facility. Now, according to that article, some scientists believe that with the amount of resources that China is putting into the field, a quantum computer may be built in a decade or less. And whether or not these claims are accurate, I think remains to be seen, but it is clear that significant research is underway around the world in the cyber realm. So I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. I look forward to learning about the efforts that you have been involved with to combat and deal with this threat, particularly on the work that you're doing to keep our electric grid and our energy infrastructure safe and reliable. So thank you for joining us. I now turn to Senator Cantwell for her comments. And I want to thank you, Senator Cantwell, because you have been dogged and persistent when it comes to the issue of cyber and the cyber threats, particularly as they relate to our energy grid. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for scheduling this important hearing so we can continue to the discussions about what technologies we need to protect our electric grid and make sure that our whole energy infrastructure is protected from cyber attacks. I want to say at the outset, I spent much of this summer working, excuse me, on this issue as well, and spent a great deal of time at our national labs with Secretary Perry, focusing on some of our cybersecurity solutions. So I hope that he understands the pressing need here and will restore the DOE's crippling cybersecurity budget that was proposed by the administration. It's very important that we continue to have the resources as a nation to fight and to protect key energy infrastructure. I am dismayed that instead of focusing on cybersecurity as one of the key issues of resiliency, he is instead trying to get a command economy approach with FERC by trying to change market-based rate prices for consumers and instead try to push a rule that would drive coal into the marketplace and raise rates on consumers. I think that FERC operates best when it operates on market rules. I also am requesting this morning, Madam Chair, in light of yesterday's or 2 days ago amazing news about the huge increase in park fees, that we would have a hearing on this in the future. Many of my constituents woke up to literally shock over the fact that these exorbitant rates would be charged in our park system. So I hope that we can have some input on this and show that our constituents are extremely concerned about it. For us in the Northwest, our outdoor economy is a big juggernaut. I know it is in your state as well. But anyway, thank you for having this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. It's such a critical issue, and getting your input is very important. I'd also like to especially welcome Mr. Carl Inhofe, who's testifying on behalf of the Pacific Northwest Lab. Again, thank you for hosting us and the Secretary earlier this year, and for all the impressive work that you do. Cybersecurity is the one issue that keeps me up at night, worrying about how foreign entities and actors might attack us as the next provocation in a international effort. We used to think of it as a plane that might fly into airspace or a sub that might cross international waters, and now what we have to worry about is provocations from actual grid attacks. So if we don't make necessary the investments to prevent and defend against these impacts, our enemies could succeed in causing widespread blackouts or devastating the economy or threatening to bring millions of Americans to the point of without power, being in great disarray. As I referenced earlier, the Trump administration proposed budget cuts to the cyber programs at DOE put our critical infrastructure at risk. I've conveyed those concerns to the administration in 2 letters, and as I said, spent a lot of time this summer hoping that they would see the impacts here to our budget and what they would do. Since our committee's last cybersecurity hearing, when we discussed the Ukraine outages of 2015 and 2016, we have witnessed numerous large-scale cyber attacks as the risks continue to grow. In July, the Washington Post reported that the Russian government hackers were behind cyber intrusions into U.S. nuclear power plant business systems. In September, it was revealed that the hackers accessed the personal information of 143 million Americans through the data breach of Equifax. And just this week, the Department of Homeland Security issued a report about ongoing cyber threats to nuclear, water, and energy sectors that appear to reference the July incidents that I just mentioned. With each day of cybersecurity threats to the grid and the multiple efforts that are underway, it's important that we continue to combat effectively our security risks through innovation. We need to take action. The good news is our national labs are ready to play a key role in bolstering our cybersecurity, and they do so in close collaboration with the private sector. PNNL Cyber Firewall blocks 24 million suspected internet communications, 25,000 of which are confirmed cyber attacks. So that's what they do each day. So I have no doubt that they know how to help protect our country and our important missions. Our witnesses today will demonstrate the breakthroughs that result from these productive public-private partnerships and why they need to continue. In that vein, I'm calling on an increase in collaboration between the government, private sector, utilities, military, and academia. I know we are going to, in our state, try to continue the discussion at the University of Washington, Bothell, and a symposium on energy cybersecurity workforce. I also, on the Commerce Committee, have attended some of the hearings that that committee has had on cyber workforce, and we know from our DOE quadrennial energy review, this is exactly what the previous secretary said we needed to do was help build this cyber workforce for tomorrow. So hopefully this symposium will bring together critical partners to leverage the knowledge, expertise, and experience of all aspects of the challenge that we face. So it's clear to me that cyber solutions will require us to leverage a world-class expertise of our labs, the private sector, and all of us working together. So that's why I hope that Secretary Perry and the President will reverse their harmful 32% cut to the Department of Energy's cybersecurity budget without further delay, and hopefully help us make the investments we need for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. And know that I join you in your concern with the recent announcement from Park Service about the fees, so that is something that we will look to. I welcome each of you to the committee this morning. Thank you for giving us your time. Dr. Duncan Earl is with us. He is the President and Chief Technology Officer for Qubitekk Incorporated. Dr. Earl, welcome.
Thank you, and excuse me. Thank you, and good morning, Madam Chair Murkowski, Ranking Member Cantwell, members of the committee. I am Dr. Duncan Earl, President and Chief Technology Officer at Qubitekk. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today to discuss the role quantum technology can play in protecting our electrical grid. The U.S. electrical grid has operated for nearly 150 years without experiencing a large-scale, long-term blackout. This is a testament to the hard work of the men and women who maintain the grid, as well as the many smart devices that we depend on to monitor and control it. However, the grid has never faced a threat of the type and severity as it is experiencing today. Over 70,000 power substations throughout our country depend and rely on smart devices to maintain the delicate balance between energy generation and energy demand. Effective coordination between these devices is only possible when they share data that is accurate and uncompromised. Unfortunately, as we have seen in other countries, the ability of hackers to infiltrate grid networks and corrupt these communications is real and growing. To prevent a devastating attack on our own nation's electrical grid, we must implement the best cybersecurity solutions possible to protect sensitive grid communications. If you ask utilities today, at this very moment, are your communication channels secure? Many will admit that they do not know. A new technology, quantum technology, can allow them to answer yes. Quantum technology enables communications that cannot be intercepted or altered. Any attempt to do so can be immediately detected and thwarted. Fundamentally different from past solutions based on mathematics and software, this new solution is rooted in physics and uses hardware to create a trusted channel that is secure today, tomorrow, and 1,000 years from now. Quantum technology uses the laws of quantum physics to generate secret keys that cannot be cracked. The keys are transmitted as light through optical fibers to devices in the field. Although quantum physics, with demonstrations of teleportation and particles existing in parallel universes, can sound like science fiction, its application to grid security is real and near term. At Qubitekk, with funding from the Department of Energy Office of Electricity Cybersecurity for Energy Delivery Systems, or CEDS program, we are conducting preliminary tests of quantum technology with utilities in California and Tennessee. In 2018 and 2019, larger pilot testing within substations is planned. We are also working closely with our industry and national laboratory partners to develop protocols that allow traditional communication systems to integrate with these new quantum systems. To speed the adoption of this technology, though, will require government action. With government support, a nationwide quantum-protected network between our substations can be built, creating an impenetrable shield around our grid's communication channels. With increased funding to existing DOE programs, quantum-enhanced cybersecurity solutions can be developed to protect every substation in our country. Ultimately, as occurred with the Internet, early government investment in communication infrastructure and equipment will be needed. Finally, Senators, let me suggest the most important reason yet why we must embrace and pursue quantum technology, and I'll echo what Ms. Murkowski said, Senator Murkowski said. China has already developed and installed the foundations for a nationwide quantum network that leverages both fiber optic and satellite-based communications. Last month, they demonstrated the first ever quantum-secured video call between China and the European Union. Earlier this month, they committed $10 billion to the creation of a massive new quantum information laboratory in eastern China. Although much of the basic science in quantum technology was developed here in the United States, our hesitation in its implementation has left us far behind in the quantum race. Quantum networks are just the beginning of the quantum revolution. Quantum technology will revolutionize cybersecurity, computers, artificial intelligence, chemistry, medicine, and ultimately the world economy. Building a quantum-protected grid will not only strengthen America's security, but will also create a sustainable first market for quantum technology here in the U.S. It represents a significant step towards challenging and eventually overtaking our counterparts in Asia and the European Union. And with that, I look forward to your questions on this technology.
Thank you, Dr. Earl. And I also want you, Dr. Earl, to speak a little bit. You mentioned the quantum technology that I had raised in my opening, and you have suggested that a quantum-protected network will create an impenetrable shield around our grid's communication channels. But does that apply to the insider threats as well? So I'm interested in this aspect. Technology is great. Sometimes it's the human factor that is our weakest link.
So quantum technology is a very powerful technology, but the grid is going to require many solutions. It's just a piece of that puzzle. However, quantum technology solves two very important problems, and it's the foundation upon which you can build a more secure grid. The first is it provides a way to immediately detect if somebody is tampering with your communication channels. And the second thing that it can do is it can provide encryption that cannot be broken. There always is a concern about insider threat. Quantum technology doesn't address that. It addresses the securing of channels. But you need that first before you can build up the rest of the solution.
So very quickly on the quantum technology, you've mentioned that traditional systems can be integrated. How easy is it to do that? You've got technology. Does the technology need to be built into the grid during its development, or is it relatively easy to add it to existing structure?
We can retrofit it, and we argue that it's actually easier than other approaches that we might use for the internet for securing and establishing secret keys among devices. So it is very grid-centric. It is very easy to implement and retrofit.
Okay.
Research, workforce, and this continued collaborative effort in the context of where we are today and how this will evolve. And Mr. Earl, I think you said it, or Mr. Rydell did, that this is ever changing. Whatever we're doing today is going to change and evolve. So where are we with the level of investment in workforce and level of interconnected responses, and I mean people responses, that we need to build here?
Dr. Earl, on quantum, you're talking about, of course, cyber is what we're concerned about. I'm on Intel, and every meeting we have deals with cyber and some type of cyber attacks that we're getting regularly and how we can stave that off. In this, I've been to an awful lot of the power plants, and we have an awful lot of coal plants, and then they're all switching stations. So when they produce the power coming out, it goes into kind of a switching station, and kind of puts it out on the grid. And you're saying that your quantum, you can protect that from the internet or being hacked by the internet, correct?
So maybe a slightly different way to define that. We definitely are trying to protect the communications between those switching facilities, the substations, and command centers. It's imperative that you're able to trust those communications. And so the channels that they're communicated over are not defended. These might be fiber optics, airwaves. You don't have complete control over those communication channels. So it's important we have a technology that can ensure that communication channel is secure first.
And you said that could be retrofitted also?
It could be, that's right. Especially, it dovetails well with what they described, ORNL described about the darknet, where you use existing fiber optic cables to basically put this system in place.
So one thing we could do is appropriate the dollars to immediately begin putting in a dark net for everybody who's connected to the grid, except maybe a distributed, if I'm selling electricity off the roof of my house, maybe not. But other than that, is that something we should be like writing in legislation now, in your opinion?
So We currently have utility partners with extensive fiber optic networks that are ready to start implementing this today or testing this today.
The quantum or the dark net?
The quantum and the dark net, it really is tied together. So there's, now that's not all utilities, and it's going to have to start small and eventually
Now,
grow.
so let me ask you, just to interrupt, because when you say not all utilities, I always mispronounce it. I don't know if it's MISO or MISO, but you have this exchange of electrons through the whole Mississippi Valley. So if there's somebody who's a weak link, doesn't have dark net, doesn't have quantum, doesn't have analog, can that go through the whole network, getting those that do have it?
So ultimately, you're only as strong as your weakest link, but your biggest links need to be secured first. And the propagation can be limited by focusing there and prioritizing there initially. And there are 3 separate grids, of course, that would be independent from one another. But let me just sort of echo the question of, can we implement this quickly? It is a question of funding. The SEDS program within DOE is doing a great job, but they don't have a large enough budget really to take on DarkNet yet. So at least from my perspective, I think that increasing the funding to that program is an excellent thing to do right away. The other point I'd like to quickly make is these new technologies will take time to be implemented. It could be as long as 5 to 10 years for some of these technologies to be implemented. If you think of where hackers were 10 years ago, and you think about where hackers are going to be in 10 years from now, that's where the urgency is coming from. We really have got to get ahead of this.
It seems to me that there is a cycle of scientific discovery that then provides necessary impetus to develop technologies that addresses those known concerns, and then once we develop those initial technologies and prototype, then we move towards bring them to a place where they can demonstrate effectiveness and be deployed to the marketplace. And I'd like to further elaborate on that. Of all the witnesses, where in terms of this cycle of discovery, prototype development, and then development towards deployment as it relates to cybersecurity threats, where are we in that process for our energy infrastructure? And are there specific investments we should be making? You mentioned that informing municipalities and communities, but is there anything specific? Because it seems like this is a continual cycle that we go through. Anyone want to take that?
So in terms of development to deployment, shortening that time, I think one of the biggest challenges is, as was mentioned earlier, we have over 3,000 utilities, some big, some small, and they're going up against a very sophisticated adversary. These nation-state hackers have much more sophisticated operations than utilities are used to. And so we're asking big and small utilities to come up with solutions on very rapidly changing technology. One of the things that the government can help to do, national labs can help to do, partnerships can help to do, is to identify a template, a solution, sort of cookie-cutter solution, that at least could be a starting point for these utilities. And then ultimately, they need assistance in implementing it and maintaining it. That right now doesn't really exist for those utilities.
I know in the state of Nevada, Governor Sandoval has created a new Office of Cyber Defense, which will serve as the primary focal point for cyber threats and security for the state of Nevada. With the addition of that cyber defense coordinator, the OCD will serve as the primary conduit with the federal government, as well as the primary entity managing cyber threat issues across the state of Nevada. Do you see that as a role most states should be involved with in coordinating with the federal level and then particularly the private sector to address this cyber threat?
I do think as well, in utilities, I think there's a follow the leader mentality. So if a set of utilities, larger utilities in one state, identify a solution that works well and they can share that with their counterparts in other utilities, we'll see that filter down. Just to echo what was mentioned there, California has the California CES 21 project, which involves utilities across the state. And they've really developed some innovative package solutions that are being adopted in California. If that is successful, then hopefully that will spread to the rest of the country as well.
Great.
But I think it's important, Madam Chair, as we're dealing with this issue, and we've spent quite a bit of time on it in armed services and intelligence as well. One of the problems is that all of our focus is defensive. How do we structure our system defensively? How do we patch? How do we have the right breakers and all of those kinds of things? In my view, though, ultimately that's not the whole answer. Part of the answer has to be a deterrent strategy or doctrine that is well known across the world, that if people attack us in cyberspace, they will feel results. They will also be at some risk. And one of the problems and one of the frustrations is that we don't have such a doctrine, and this isn't a criticism of the current administration. The prior administration did not do this either. But I think, Madam Chair, if we're going to effectively deal with the risk of cyber attack, there has to be a deterrent doctrine whereby our adversaries know that this kind of attack will not be accepted, will not be not responded to in some way. So I think that's a big part of the problem here. We can be the best bobbers and weavers in the history of the world, but if you're not allowed to ever punch back, you're going to lose the fight. And so I think that's something very important that we're talking about it in armed services, and we passed amendments to the National Defense Bill, but we're waiting for the administration, and we were waiting for the prior administration to come forth with a cyber strategy beyond simply patching the system. So with that, if you can find a question in there, you're welcome to it. But I just felt that was an important part of this discussion. It's not only the technology of strengthening the grid, but it's also strengthening the deterrence so that the attack doesn't come in the first place.
If you don't mind, I'd like to address that. So we talked a little today about quantum technology, quantum key distribution technology, which can defend the grid. The great thing about that technology, or the flip side of that technology, is it also can be used on the offense. Quantum computing can be used to crack codes and really take a much more aggressive stance on the offense side. So by investing in our own defense, we actually do provide a path to an offensive strategy as well if we needed it.
I raised China in my opening. You spoke to it. What other nations are out there that are leading in this space?
So unfortunately, there's a number of countries that are leading the U.S. China definitely would be the top of the list, but the EU is making a concerted effort. They're spending quite a bit of money to pursue quantum technology. Australia and Canada as well are very aggressive in this area. So we're probably fourth or fifth on that list.
Interesting.